Hello, everybody. Welcome to Story Time from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. The story we have for you today comes from the Native American tradition, and it is about a man that they have a lot of stories about. It is about Iktomi, and this is the story of Iktomi and the berries. Now, Iktomi stories always start and end the same way. So, let's start the story of Iktomi and the berries. Iktomi was walking along. The sun had just risen and he had decided to go out hunting. I will shoot some prairie dogs, he thought, and I will give all of my friends and my relatives a feast. And that will impress them. And they will say to me, "Ikto, you're a great hunter. You're so generous. We love you." Iktomi, he was just a little bit proud of himself. Well, he had decided to go out hunting. So he had taken his bow and his arrows and his knife. And then he thought, if I just go out onto the prairie to hunt the prairie dogs, they will see me coming and they will know that I am coming to hunt them and they will run away. So Iktomi thought that he would do something clever. He had a coyote skin. And he took the coyote skin. And coyote is a kind of a big wild dog. And he took the coyote skin and he put it over the top of him and he pulled the skin of the coyote down low. And he thought to himself, now as I go out hunting, all of the birds and the animals will think I am just an old coyote. Now, coyotes walk on 4 legs, and people like Iktomi walk on 2 legs. Animals and birds are not that silly. They know the difference. But Iktomi thought it was a very clever idea to wear the coyote skin, and so he wore it out hunting. The problem is, coyotes and people are not shaped the same, and so Ikto had pulled up that coyote skin over his face, and he couldn't see very well. And so he was looking and looking and looking for the prairie dogs, but he couldn't see them. Because the prairie dogs could see him and he looked pretty silly. And so they were hiding a little bit far away, but not too far away, because the prairie dogs were having a lot of fun watching Iktomi try to hunt them and laughing with each other about how silly that human was. Well, eventually, Iktomi got tired of hunting. He was creeping around with his bow and his arrow at the ready, and he couldn't find any prairie dogs. All of the white people came, and they killed all of the buffaloes. And now they haven't left me any prairie dogs. Well, he had been looking and looking and not finding any prairie dogs. And his insides were getting very hungry. They were empty. There was no food in there. And so they started growling and calling out, "Ikto, you need to feed us." And Iktomi said, "Be quiet. How can I find us something to eat if you keep making all that noise and scaring off all of the birds and the animals? Can't you see that you've scared them all away?" Well, hunting for prairie dogs is not working, Iktomi said to himself. There has to be something else I can do. Why does this always happen? Every time I want something, I go looking for it and I can't find it. I know. I will go to the river and I will hunt some ducks instead. And then all of my relatives will say, "Iktomi, these ducks are delicious. You are so generous for giving us this wonderful feast of duck. It is wonderful feast and it tastes so good. And oh, you're so wonderful, Iktomi. We all love you so much." And so Ikto went off to the river to go searching for ducks. And he he decided he was going to crawl this time because the ducks, they could fly away pretty fast. And he might not be able to shoot one. So he got down and he started to crawl towards the river. And he could hear the ducks talking to each other. They might have been laughing just a little bit too, but Iktomi couldn't tell because he couldn't understand what they were saying. But he could hear them. And he was creeping closer and closer to the river. But he was still wearing that coyote skin, and he still couldn't see very well. And so what he couldn't see was that the river had cut away the bank underneath the edge of the bank where he was sitting. There was an overhang, and he was crawling out onto that overhang. And when he got out on that overhang, Iktomi was too heavy. And so the overhang went crash, and it fell into the river. And Iktomi fell into the river with a giant splash and a crashing sound. And it scared all the ducks, and they all flew away. While Iktomi crawled out of the river, dripping wet. Oh, that's great. All the ducks are gone, and I'm so hungry. And just then, he looked at the water, and he spotted some beautiful red berries. Oh, they looked delicious. And he thought to himself, well, that's wonderful. I won't have to hunt anything. I can just gather the berries, and then I'll take them home, and they're nice and fresh, and I'll make some berry soup, and I'll give it to all of my relatives, and they'll say, oh, Iktomi, we love your berry soup. It's so good. Would you give us the recipe? So Iktomi reached into the river to gather those berries to make his berry soup. But all he got was water. Well, perhaps the berries are further down in the water because the water was pretty clear. So he just couldn't see them. Maybe they were further down. And so Iktomi jumped back into the river to try to find the berries. And he reached around and he searched around, but he couldn't find the berries anywhere. And he thought to himself, maybe I jumped into the wrong spot in the river. And so he came back up and he crawled back out onto the bank and he looked in the river again. No, they're right there, right where I jumped in. Maybe I just need to go a little bit further down. And so this time, Iktomi dove into the river. But he had to come up really fast again because he was still wearing that coyote skin and it got kind of tangled up around his neck. And so he got out of the river and he took off the coyote skin and he threw it on the bank. He said, okay, now I'm gonna get those berries. And so he dove into the water and he opened up his mouth as he swam down towards the bottom of the river, hoping he would catch some of those berries in his mouth. But all he got was a mouthful of mud and water. And so he crawled back out onto the bank again. He's spitting out some of that mud and water. He said, it's gross. Okay, let me see. The berries are right there. They're right there. I can see them. Everything is going against me today. Maybe. No, that won't work. I know. The problem is I can't stay down underwater long enough to find the berries. So I need to stay down underwater longer. How can I do that? Aha! I brought rope with me while I was hunting. And so Iktomi went and he found the heaviest rock that he could find. One that he could still lift, but that was very heavy and hard to lift. And he tied his rope around the rock. And then he took the other end of the rope and he did something that was not so smart. He tied it around his neck. That is not a good place to tie a rope. It was really stupid. But Iktomi thought it was a good idea, so that's what he did, because there wasn't anyone there to tell him it wasn't. So then he picked up that giant rock, and he was holding it. He took a big, deep breath, and and he held it, and then he took the rock. 1, 2, 3, and he threw the rock into the river, and he got pulled into the river after it, jerked right off the bank, and fell down to the bottom of the river. And the rock sank all the way down, 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 pulling Iktomi with it. When it got down to the bottom, a little ploof of dirt came up, mud from the bottom of the river, and Iktomi stopped for a minute. He looked around and he thought, okay, now I'm going to find those berries. And he looked everywhere. He looked this way and that way and above him and below him and everywhere, but he still couldn't find the berries. Ugh. And he was looking, and all of a sudden he realized he really needed to breathe. But down underwater, you can't breathe. And so Iktomi tried to swim up to the surface to get air, but he got stopped because he was still tied to that big rock. And then he went back down to the bottom and he picked up the rock and he tried to swim up to the surface, but the rock was so heavy. And with the rock in his arms, he couldn't actually swim up to the surface. And by now, Iktomi was starting to get a little scared. You see, he couldn't breathe and he was really starting to panic. And he didn't know what to do. He was tied to the rock and he tried to untie the knot, but it wouldn't untie. And he didn't know what to do. And he was starting to panic and he was starting to not feel so good because he wasn't breathing. And then all of a sudden, at the last minute, he remembered he had a knife on his belt. And so he pulled out his knife and he cut the rope, not by his neck, but he cut the rope that was tying him to the rock. And he quick swam up to the surface. He got up to the surface and he crawled out under the bank and he was coughing up water and spitting up mud, and he was so wet and he was so hungry and he was so tired and he was hungry. And Iktomi laid down on the riverbank and he rolled over on his back. What? Those are berries. The berries are, but the berries were, oh. I wasn't seeing the berries in the water. I was seeing the reflection of the berries in the water. Oh, I hope nobody saw me being so foolish. And then Iktomi got angry. He got so mad at those berries for making him look so foolish that he jumped up and he picked up his bow that was laying on the riverbank and he started to beat the berry bushes with it, and he was yelling at the berry bushes, "How could you make me look so stupid? You should not play tricks on me like that. You stupid berry bushes. I'll beat you and beat you and beat you and beat you and beat you, and everybody will beat you from now on because you're stupid berry bushes." He was just yelling at the berry bushes so much and beating them and beating them and beating them with his bow. In fact, he beat them so much that all of the lovely, beautiful red berries fell off the berry bushes into the river and floated downstream where all the ducks had a feast. But when he was done beating the berry bushes and there wasn't a single berry left, Iktomi was still all wet and hungry. And he didn't have a single berry or a duck or a prairie dog to eat. And so Iktomi went on his way. And that is the story of Iktomi and the berries from the Native American tradition. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll come back and join us again on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Central Time. We will have another story for you from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. See you later, everybody. Bye.